All right. Well, thank you, Adobe, and everybody who's joined today. We're going to take a look at Adobe Experience Manager and Acrolinx, and the idea of strategy-aligned content, and the use of an AI-powered engine to help improve content. So I've got a quick analogy just to set the stage and help people understand the role of AEM and the role of Acrolinx. So if you take a plumbing analogy and think of AEM as a content management system, it represents the plumbing. So the pipe work that contains the water, organizes and manages the water to make sure it gets to where it needs to go efficiently. Acrolinx complements that in that it's a filter for the water. It's taking a look at the quality of the water, ensuring that it is clean and consistent and clear. So it's the content in this analogy is the water, and the plumbing is AEM as that management environment. Now, we think in terms of amazing content that powers customer experience, and certainly product documentation is one type of content that influences the customer experience. And we've seen a significant shift in the past years from customers being pushed content, or the companies that are producing the content, pushing it out to the customer, to a pull model. Right, so customers going in, searching for and finding the content that they want when they want it, right? And that's increased the number of touch points between the content consumers and the businesses that are producing that content, right? So touch points between businesses and today's global consumers, those are primarily written, and that influences your customer journey. Right? If you are considering buying a product and you want to understand more detail about that product, you're early on in that customer journey phase, right? You may be transitioning from that to a purchase of the content, and what information do you need available to you to make that purchase happen? Or shifting later in that customer experience journey to retention. So your support information that helps answer the questions that you need answered in order to do your job. And then wrapping all of that up in this continuum is if an organization does that really well, you're building loyalty within your customer base, right? And at the heart of that is content that needs to be managed effectively and produced effectively, right? And enterprises invest and maintain millions of pages of content in various formats, right, for various purposes. But it all has that single purpose of serving the need of the customer and supporting that experience across all of those touch points. Now, the touch points shared between a company and its audience those are precious moments. And we start thinking about how many moments exist within your organization, right? So customers and prospects interact with your content kind of every second in a growing number of channels, right? If you look to the highest level, right, we've got a global population of about 4.5 billion people that are connected to the internet. And they perform about 3.5 billion Google searches every day, right? Examples of those touch points are kind of emails, user manuals, data sheets, et cetera, right? And all of that gets consumed across various channels and different media types, right? And then we start looking at, well, how can we measure the impact of those touch points, right? And included in that is the number of visits, the engagement and bounce rates, the open rates, and the click-through rates of that content, right? So now you're layering into this world of AEM and Acrolinx. You're laying in the world of analytics, consumption analytics, and performance analytics, right? So the use of customer effort scores and net promoter scores and customer satisfaction scores, product satisfaction scores. So we're not just talking about the words in the data topics that are being managed and versioned and moved through workflow, right? We're talking about the content that really forms the relationship that your business has with your customers, right? And for some of us, the way we're creating that content, right, is that we've got the pressures to produce content quickly. It can happen in a chaotic manner when it's not managed, right? And the expectation is that content is going to speak for the company. It's going to trigger the actions and behaviors that you want. It's going to answer the questions that the customers have, right? And challenges that are faced is doing that with limited time and budget constraints. Again, with the expectation that what you're producing connects with your audiences. Right? So compare and contrast that to kind of the world that we need, right? Is that we need amazing content that makes a connection with the consumer throughout that customer experience, right? And content is the critical differentiator between success and failure for commerce and education and training and support. And then that bigger picture again is that customer experience. And I can't overemphasize the notion that the content you're producing is the face of your business, right? It's what the business shares with your customers and your prospects, and it builds trust, and it forms that relationship that you have, right? So what are some of the aspects that go into this idea of amazing content, right? It's amazing content should be findable and discoverable, right? The notion of scannability, right? Impart the information to your content consumers as quickly and effectively as possible, right? Do that with clarity and consistency. Do that with the tone of voice that will connect with that customer, right? Think about the emotional impact of content, right? So emotive writing. And certainly in the world we live in today, doing that in an inclusive way so that you're not alienating any portion of your audience. So those are some of the characteristics that we think of around producing amazing content. Now, the positive business impacts that can come from that, right, is the use of AEM, as well as being mindful and intentful of the content and how you create it, right, will help you maximize your budgets, right? Scale your content operations through the use of technology, right? And introducing efficiencies in your workflow, right? The earlier in the content development process you can align your content to your standards and your strategy, the more you can streamline that workflow. That improves time to market, improved clarity and reduced ambiguity in the content, reduces your translation costs, right? And you elevate the writer and content creator's role in the process. And those are high cost resources. You can certainly address risk and compliance issues within content, right? Non-compliant terminology is certainly a concern for many organizations. And then the higher level task of when you have more than 2 writers that are producing content, how do you keep them aligned? When you have 10 writers, when you have 50 writers, when you have 100 writers, how do you keep them all aligned in producing content that represents the organization? And that's where Acrolinx comes in to help make the guidelines and the terminology and the standards actionable across that large community of people that are writing content, and governing that in the ways of use of inclusive language, tone, clarity, emotion. Couple examples. The United States Air Force, right? The publishing organization there is tasked with educating the active duty people, the guard, the reserves, the civilians, all that have to perform their responsibilities and their jobs, right? It's the utmost priority that they do that effectively. So clarity and consistency and comprehensibility of the content is mission critical in the language that they use. And as Stefan mentioned, one of our customers using AEM and Acrolinx together is Kona. Global products with teams spread around the world producing content creates an interesting challenge, and their challenges were time to market, making quality improvements that result in translation cost savings, right? The combination of the products improve their business processes to drive that consistency and clarity across the organization. Let's go a little bit deeper and start talking about kind of what is the Acrolinx platform. And there are three concepts that I'll highlight here, and in a minute, I'll start showing you what this looks like in context of AEM. But the idea of capture is taking your content strategy, your standards, your goals, right, your style, your clarity level that you're interested in, and bring that into the platform and make it available to the writers creating content. And when it becomes available to the writer, that we transition into kind of this middle column where it's about aligning the content that is being created to those standards and that content strategy. And we're able to do that in a way where you can score or measure that alignment. And that feeds into the right-hand column here of analyzing the content. So analyzing it for the writer to allow them to massage the content to be in alignment, as well as step back and look at the content across the organization, right? Look at all of my product content, or look at a product family or an individual product to understand how well is that content aligning to the strategy. And then you start to introduce the notion of content performance. If the content were an employee, how well is that content doing its job for the organization? So those three concepts are kind of important to how we think about Acrolinx. So I'm going to transition into away from the slides and show you what this looks like in context of AEM. So I've got an environment here and some examples that I've created for this presentation. So I've got a data map here, and if I go into an edit mode of the data map here, we'll take a look at our simple map here and some topics. And this icon here is Acrolinx. Acrolinx gets embedded into the AEM experience. So if I go and edit this topic, I've got my data content here. It's fairly simple. I've got a title, a short description, a paragraph, some bulleted lists, etc. And as a writer, the way the content strategy for my organization gets exposed to me is through what we call the sidebar. And when I run a check of this data topic, the content now is being analyzed against that content strategy that becomes actionable for me. And the action comes through in the guidance that the sidebar is providing. So these are, in this case, there's 39 issues. I've got an alignment score of 64. And we're checking content across these categories. You'll notice the color coding here aligns with these issues or cards. So words and phrases is my terminology, the terms I should be using or shouldn't be using. the idea of correctness, clarity, tone, inclusive language, etc. And I can just give you a sense of what this guidance that is being provided to the writer looks like, right? For the audience of this content, I may know that the majority of the consumers are coming in through a mobile device. So I want to guide the writer to be more concise with the titles, more concise with the length of sentences, the number of bullets in a bulleted list, etc. Those are all types of guidance that can be defined as part of your content strategy. So Acrolinx is not telling the writer what the title should be. Acrolinx is informing the writer to be intentful and understand who the audience is for the content and live within the content strategy. Another example here is inclusive language, right? So gendered language that is in the content that you might not want to use because you may alienate or not be connecting with part of your audience. The use of terminology, right? So when Acrolinx is able to prescribe the correct answer and how to align to the content, it will, right? So in this case, the company name is incorrect. A quick click and the content will be updated, right? I've got a grammar issue here. I've got guidance in the length of sentences, right? So if you get into a sentence length where it's 27 words roughly or more, right, give or take, the clarity of that sentence can decrease. The overused expressions, the use of slang, the complexity of the content, right? Whether it's sentence length, the use of active voice, right, versus passive voice. Seeing kind of comma delimited lists and descriptions within the content that might be better presented as a bulleted list. All of these qualities kind of lean into the idea of making it easier to impart the information to the reader more quickly. And that's that concept of scannability. Another example of kind of the use of slang words and inclusive language, right? So in this case, the phrase here is not a slander, but it's very close to it, right? So you can guide your writers to kind of stay away from that type of language. So all of these qualities get communicated to the writer to help guide them in aligning this content to the content strategy and the definition of who your audience is to produce that audience aligned content. Now, a few more different feature sets in here, right? I talked about findability, and something that Acrolinx is always doing is learning from the content that is being written. And this feature set around findability helps a writer be mindful about what words are used in the content. So this is a list of 30 keywords that Acrolinx has found in the content. And we start reporting on metrics, right? So the frequency, the literal count, the prominence score. And the prominence score is a measurement of based on where that keyword appears in the document, it will be weighted differently. So if it's in the title, it'll carry a higher weight than if it's, say, buried in a paragraph down below. And you can promote these discovered keywords over to a targeted list. So I've just promoted these 4 over here from this discovered list over to a target list. And this is a stacked ranked list. So I can organize these keywords in any order that makes sense, any order of priority. And again, the writer is being more mindful and intentful of the content that is being written. Now, if you happen to work with SEO strategists that are helping to align topic information, topic briefs often contain SEO keywords that a writer should be mindful of. You can add them here into this list. And again, Acrolinx will report on their usage. And if I do a subsequent check of the content, Acrolinx will work off of this stacked rank list and start providing the writer with visibility into how those keywords appear or do not appear in the content. So warnings start to surface for the writer, where these warnings here are that the prominence score for the second and third position keywords are higher than the first position. So as a writer, I now know I've got to go and rework the content in order to better align it. So those are notions of making the writer think more about the discoverability or findability of the content. And if we're dealing with a support context where you're writing support articles or technical bulletins, allowing that content or ensuring that content is findable can result in improved self-service, right? Improved customer effort scores, right? You're able to, the customer is able to get to the information that they need more quickly. That results in call deflection, right? And support calls are certainly a significant cost within many organizations. And if you can have a positive impact on reducing that call volume, right? Now you've got content that is working for the organization in a positive way. Something you'll notice too is that my original score has increased because I made some changes to that content. And if I click this box, you'll start to see, I'm sorry about that. I've lost a style sheet in here. It's usually much more pretty than this, but you'll see the Acrolinx scorecard. This is where the analytics start to come into picture, and you get metrics around and scores around each of the categories that Acrolinx is measuring. So there's an overall score of a 73. My clarity score is fairly low, and I've got a number of issues here. Consistency, correctness, inclusive language. And there's metrics around reading grade level, informality index, liveliness, etc. All of this analytical information gets fed back into higher level reports that I'll show you in a few minutes. But I want to come back here and talk about one more capability of Acrolinx, and that is the ability to analyze the emotions that are within a document. So if I initiate this analysis, Acrolinx is taking a look at sentiment and emotion of the content, right? And sentiment first, we've got a word cloud. As you might expect, kind of words that are green carry a positive sentiment. Words that are gray are a neutral. Words that are red, if I had any, would carry a negative sentiment, right? And again, it gives me as a writer more visibility into that content, right? And again, going back to my analogy, the plumbing within or the plumbing analogy with AEM, right, being that managed environment, we're really talking about the water, and the content is the water that is flowing through that plumbing. So the earlier that I can align this content to my strategy, the more smooth, the faster the content can flow through your business processes to be delivered where it needs to go. And certainly understanding the sentiment as well as the emotional impact of the content is a factor in that. So on the emotion front, I can see very, very quickly that this topic, right, the primary emotions are trust, anticipation, and joy. Right? I've got a bit of sadness and fear, etc. And there are 8 core emotions, kind of foundational emotions. Not every word falls into one of these emotions, and one word can span multiple emotions. But if I look at it, I can get down to the actual words that are my trust words. So fundamental is a trust word, agreed, etc. And I can understand, well, what are my fear words if I want, right? Bad and missing and tactics. I'm going to show you another example here where if I take this idea of a service bulletin, it's opening up here, and this service bulletin can be a very simple message, right? Is the service is changing, right? From October moving forward, we'll have a limited number of consultants. If I take this simple message and I run an analysis of it, right, we'll see the emotional impact here of it, which is fear and sadness and anger. Okay, and my fear words are changes. Sadness is kind of limited. If I look at this second version of that service bulletin, right? I'm communicating the same message, but in this case, instead of changes of modified the content to improvements. Instead of limited, I'm using the word streamline. And if I do an analysis of this version of this service bulletin, we'll see the emotional profile of the content has changed very significantly. Right? I'm now dealing with trust and anticipation and joy. And when you combine kind of the emotional analysis of the content along with your inclusive language checking and guiding people, you're now producing content that goes beyond just the idea of diversity and inclusion, and you get into the idea of belonging and making people feel comfortable with the messaging and the content that you're producing. That are supporting your products. So this perspective, right, overall, is Acrolinx providing a writer with guidance to guide them to produce the content that you want to. The idea of scoring the content and making it visible and measurable to the organization, not just the writer, but the organization, right? So I'm going to shift here and talk about Acrolinx from a different perspective, and that's the analysis perspective. So all of the scoring that is happening at the writer level, those scorecards are archived here, and then we start exposing that information to the organization in different ways. And these reports and dashboards give you greater visibility into the organization. So at a high level, I could come in here and take a look at a trends report. And over time, how is my organization trending in the alignment of the content to that defined strategy? And I can organize that by business function, department, product line, kind of any type of filtering model that you want to follow, right? I can go down to kind of categorical scores. So at a high level, this is the type of insight, an example of the insight that Acrolinx can provide as a trends report. And again, that's a high level look. I could go down to a very detailed look in this score roll-up dashboard, which is down to the department, down to the individual user, right? And how at the user level, what's the amount of work that they're doing? What is their average score? And again, over time, being able to filter that. It's another kind of analytical report that I find interesting, and that is content alignment. And this is where the content analytics that Acrolinx is able to gather and surface can come together with an Adobe Analytics, right? Is my documentation here, right? It may be product content, right? Internal content, documentation, any type of content that you can, your organization produces. I can click in here and see what are the assets or documents that are not performing or living up to our content standards. What are their scores? And if you layer in the Adobe Analytic perspective, which is on the consumption end, the bounce rates, the time on page, the click-through rates, you can see what are the documents that are not aligning to the strategy well, that are viewed at a significant quantity rate. And those are things that I would want to adjust quickly and assign resources in order to correct. Whereas if you learn from the website analytics that the content is not viewed, you don't have that pressure to align that content. You may consider retiring it. You may dig deeper to try and understand, well, why is it not being viewed? So you get to make those higher level business decisions through the combination of the content analytics as well as the web analytics. And you can get into a wealth of kind of insight. If terminology and the management and use of terminology is challenging, and it certainly is, because terminology feeds into search and again, discoverability. Right, being able to see term variations that are used. Right, so we did work with Hewlett-Packard, where we found that they had about 46 different ways of saying power cord. Now, if you're searching for a power cord online and you use one of those 46 variations, you're not seeing all of the content that they have to offer and that can help answer your questions. So this is the analytics side of things. Going back to kind of that first concept of capture. We have the content goals and the strategy and what that looks like within the platform takes shape in terms of these targets. So a target represents a content strategy, that standard, that goal that you're trying to accomplish or achieve in producing your content. And you can have different types of strategies for different purposes. So learning and training may be slightly different than your technical documentation than it is for marketing. And if I come into a specific target, this is where all of the settings that make up your content strategy live, right? So what are, a target breaks down into multiple goals. So the use of terminology, the words and phrases that you want to use for your technical documentation in this case. What does correctness mean, right? Your grammar and spelling, your clarity levels, right? So around sentence length, different metrics, the use of acronyms, the use of passive voice or active voice. And Acrolinx provides presets. So based on our experience, we've got presets that enable configuring Acrolinx more quickly. And again, that reduces time to value. So you can leverage those presets or you can define different custom settings. And so if I want shorter list items, I can modify the target goal for list items, etc. If I want to take a look at inclusive language, right, and that deals with respectful language and gender neutral language, people first, etc. Right? There's presets around those. So each of these goals breaks down into individual guidelines or rules. And the way to think about these rules are they're a set of guardrails that sits on top of the artificial intelligence engine that is Acrolinx, and it's a natural language processing engine. And these guardrails really govern how you as an organization want to use the English language. And again, back to that audience that you're trying to meet and the business goals that you have for your content. I'm going to come back here, and I'm happy to answer questions. I know I moved a little quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions for folks if there are any.
So we do have a number of questions for you. And so if you can take a look at the Q&A pod, might follow along there. I was just getting my
the Q&A
lighting and camera set up again.
Yep.
There you go.
All right. So I'm still sharing, so people are seeing this as well?
Yes, they are. Yeah, so you can see June's question there at the top.
Yep. So in an organization, who's most likely to view the reports? Marketing, tech, pubs, managers.
Maybe Sean. Maybe a suggestion here. Maybe you put on your slide deck again.
Sure.
Maybe with your contact data.
Sure.
The usual practice we have is that we read the questions to you and then you can answer them.
Ah, okay.
I've broken German protocol.
All right.
Sorry, Matt. Okay. Good.
So who usually uses the analytics and the reports? It can vary within organizations. So certainly people that are making business decisions, and there's a vast set of reports that are in there, right? So within an organization, if you have pains around managing terminology and trying to get people to consistently use terminology, you may have owners of or committees that are defining terminology. So there's reports and analytics in there around that help you understand what terminology is being used, what term variants are at play, and you decide what are the preferred terms, the do not use terms that should be used but only in certain contexts. Those are all things that can be defined. So a translation or a terminology-minded group would use those reports. Reports certainly around the usage of the platform would influence or be beneficial to managers. The writers themselves tend to focus in on the documents or the individual topics that they're working on and the reporting at that level. So it can be a wide spectrum of people. I think the highest value is when you start to correlate the consumption metrics, right? I talked about Adobe Analytics and the visibility that it provides into who and what content is being consumed on the website. Taking that insight and bringing it back to the content and correlating it to understand, well, what content is really working for the organization and what content isn't. And that visibility, the combined visibility, allows you to adjust your strategy. And that's so your web team can get involved in that and consuming the content. And that does interesting things in that it can get two different teams the team producing the content and the team that manages the website, talking about these analytics and bringing them together and aligning on what the business goals are. So we often see that as a cultural shift that happens, and it tends to happen around that reporting and the analytics.
We had another positioning question. And
Sure.
So Jared was asking about just going off of the people that might be likely to use that. In terms of the workflows that are available to someone who is going to work with Acrolinx, I had a question about whether you can use Acrolinx. What does that look like using it in unstructured documentation? Or perhaps is it something that's available to, say, a RoboHelp user? Can you put Acrolinx into a RoboHelp's workflow, for example?
Yeah. So Acrolinx does not impose any requirements or changes to your workflow processes. We fit into where the content is written. And in the Adobe world, we fit into a number of the Adobe tools. Unfortunately, RoboHelp is on our roadmap. And I think that's kind of a reflection of the business demand, where it's you look back. I'm not a spring chicken, so I look back a number of years, and extremely dominant tool, very popular tool. It kind of faded away, and now we're certainly seeing a resurgence of it. So it's on our roadmap to support going forward. We just don't have it today. But if you look at the broader tool set, certainly AEM, as I've shown you today, FrameMaker is supported. Adobe InDesign is supported. InCopy is also supported. But I do look forward to when we have a RoboHelp integration.
Yeah. We already talked about that between Adobe and Acrolinx, and it's something that will come hopefully very soon. So then we have a few more questions, or two actually. That's an interesting one that you probably get to hear very often. Does Acrolinx only work in English?
No. So there's two ways to think about Acrolinx. There's multiple ways, but two. Acrolinx and applying what it does to the source content that is being written. And we support multiple languages there. In terms of popularity, English is certainly the primary language that we support. We also support German, French, Swedish. Now my mind has gone blank. There's 5 or 6
others.
Simplified Chinese.
And is simplified English one of those rule sets?
So we differentiate between language and rule sets. Mm-hmm. So STE as a rule set is absolutely supported.
Excellent. That one just came up in the question pod, so I figured we'd pop that one when we're on that other question.
There's adding a bit more value there. We often see we've worked with many organizations that have adopted STE. If that's of interest, Acrolinx can very strictly follow the STE standard. That could be culturally challenging to an authoring community that is new to it.
Sure.
So Acrolinx is also able to soften that rule set, right? So complement the dictionaries with, your product-centric terminology that you should be following, right? Okay. Or soften the adherence to the rules that make up STE.
So
and that makes
that transition in that direction.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. Yep. Yeah. There was a final question right at the top there about how long the integration with a new tool takes, and I'm thinking that's more a question of a new Acrolinx customer, what might they expect in terms of acquiring a license for the product and putting it in and having it kind of highly integrated into their workflow? What might that look like for a new customer?
Yep. So it can be very, very quick.
Mm-hmm.
It can be days. The long pole in that tent, right? So if it can be very quick if you already organize your terminology.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a clear definition of your style and your strategy.
That's a fair response.
Yeah. So if you have those things, it's quick. We still do an analysis of the content in comparison to those things.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that as organized, then we take what you do have, and then we lean on the content even more.
Mm-hmm.
To do an analysis of okay, is there any differences between the content and what you say you want to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a bit of a consensus building, negotiation, education process, and so it can be weeks to a month or two. Mm-hmm. As a typical timeline for an implementation.
Got it. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and that's true with any new technological implementation, right? Moving
Yep.
from Word to something else. If you have styles, then that's going to make that conversion easier. To go back to Acrolinx, if you have no sense of taxonomy and your terminology is all over the map, then you should expect, that there's more lifting to be done, and might take a little bit longer. So very, very fair response there. Thanks.
There was a question from Kier. What versions of Acrolinx Sidebar, AM, and Acrolinx Server are you using in the demo?
I've drawn a blank. I'm happy to follow up and provide that information.
We have plenty of time in the Q&A pod after you're done. So
yeah. I will try and look that up in parallel here.
Yeah.
It is a current version of, I know it's a current version of AEM, and the authoring tool in there, the XML web editor. I'm spacing the version numbers.
That's funny. That's like, how old are your children? They are, what are their names? Wait, how old are they?
Which eye color has your wife?
Right.
Yes, I was smart enough not to use that one as an example there.
What's your anniversary date?
Yeah.
You're right. Rajan was asking, is Acrolinx somehow connected or implemented with the CRM?
So yes, that a lot of CRMs also have knowledge management capabilities, right? So a Salesforce and where casework takes place and articles are being drafted. Those are certainly contexts and use cases that we see frequently. Yes, I'm not sure if more of an answer is desired there.
Maybe the question is also a little bit where exactly it could fit in there. So maybe Rajan, you can put that in the chat and then we can discuss it during the next session or so. The exact use case is there. Okay.
You can always reply to that QA response as well. So keep that thread in the Q&A and it makes it a little easier for Sean to find it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that way, yeah. And Jet has, we don't use AM, but could the analytics report side of Acrolinx be run on any website of generated HTML content? Could we combine Acrolinx Analytics with Google Analytics, for example? Mm-hmm. Very different things.
Yep, absolutely. Yes to all the above. Something that I did not show is there's another interface to Acrolinx, which is called Content Analyzer. And it is a batch and bulk checking tool. So you can point it at a website, your own website, and have Acrolinx perform the same type of analysis at scale. You can point it at a file system if you happen to use a file system. And you get content analysis reports. And it's an interesting capability because while it'll give you insight into your own content, you can also point it at your competitors' website. And you start to learn the voice and tone and language that they use to communicate to their prospects, their customers, etc. And that becomes a competitive analysis tool that is a common use case. And certainly Google Analytics, right? It's yes. Everything that I've kind of talked about in terms of Adobe Analytics would apply to the Google side as well.
Yeah.
Some of it, maybe.
Yeah, some of it. Thank you. Yep.
Adobe Analytics is, I guess, a little bit more powerful.
Right.
Jet has, I think we have answered your question, so I mark it as that. And there's one question left, Matt. Do you want to take that one?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and this one's an easy one for you. What sort of information on return on investment, case studies, marketing, pre-sales material, things that you love to answer are available for the customer who is interested in potentially hearing about your product?
Sure. So our website address is there, acrolinx.com. There's a wealth of information in there. There is a white paper around the ROI of content that goes into and breaks down a number of the areas, right? So product content, I view it similar to a support content, right? It's product content helps answer people's questions and should do that quickly. And if you do that well, where the content can be found, you're avoiding people opening up a support ticket or a case with your organization.
Yep.
And that's one context, right? So I always think about who consumes the content first and what jobs are they trying to perform. And that, in my mind, helps inform you around what your audience is and what your business goals should be for that content.
Yeah, preempting those more expensive interactions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very valuable.